critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
So in a nutshell, Richard, would you support an immediate ceasefire?
I would support a ceasefire that led to the return of all the hostages. I think the hostages for Israeli society is an open wound. I mean, again, I think the Israeli government let down their people on October the 7th, and the very kind of basis of a social contract was broken when people had their homes invaded and were either killed or taken captive. It is the first order of business to return the captives. If the captives were returned, if a ceasefire involved a Hamas ceasefire and a repositioning of power to another entity, another Palestinian entity, then yes, ceasefire is great. Anything that can stop the fighting should be supported.
Okay, very, very interesting, because that's contrary again to what Netanyahu's saying. He's saying they basically have to be eliminated before you even have the discussion. I want to then focus on George. First of all, there were a couple of points that Richard raised, which he questioned your summary. Do you want to come back to him on those?
Well, obviously, the question was, we go back to the UN partition plan. There's no evidence that Israel ever accepted the UN partition plan. They knew that the Arabs would not accept it, and so they pretended that they had accepted it. They didn't accept the partition plan, and that is why they always coveted those territories that was occupied by Arabs after the 1948 war. The story of the 1967, that this was an attack on Israel, is just nobody in Israel seriously takes that. I mean, that's just absurd. I mean, even historians like Benny Morris kind of rejected. Of course, it was an act of war by Israel. Israel launched that war. Clearly, Nasser was caught by surprise. He didn't know what was coming. That's why he hadn't made no preparations for that war. And the goal always was to seize those two pieces of territory that was part of the British mandatory Palestine in order to create this greater Israel. Nasser made very generous offers after the 67 war, which was basically return to the status quo ante and a settlement of the refugee problem. And the settlement of the refugee problem had been an ongoing thing. There were United Nations General Assembly resolutions demanding a settlement of the refugee problem. That was Nasser's peace plan, and then of course, all the rest of it, which were clearly involved Israel returning to the 67 borders. That was a simple plan. But once the issue of the settlements was clearly what the key hindrance, and of course it was sponsored by the governments. I mean, again, there's no point in denying that. Even Israelis don't deny it. Of course, it was the government. Yes, you said it was a kind of leftish government. They offered Golda Meir and Moshe Dayan, but they were sponsoring. They were financing the settlement, and it was done with a view to essentially that you're going to build these settlements. You're going to integrate this within Israel to the point when it simply will become impossible to break the settlements.
Okay. Last few minutes available to us. I do want your sort of take on a potential solution for the region. I appreciate it's a massive subject, but Martin, if you can give me your thoughts on those.
Yeah, I'm listening to Richard. I really feel strongly that the big problem we've got here is that no one trusts Israel anymore. And they always take the high moral ground. They always have the moral tutelage to dish out in great quantities. But whether you talk about George's reference to 1947 or 67 war, which Israel started under what today we call false flag attacks, or even post 2005, and even today, the idea of Israel talking peace, talking for a ceasefire with Hamas, when you're still slaughtering so many people, so many thousands of people every day in a genocide. You're still killing the leaders. How do you negotiate with an organization whose leaders you're killing every single day? That doesn't seem to be very genuine. It seems to be actually quite delusional. Actually, I don't think Israel has the high moral ground at all, and this is part of the problem. Is it's not taken seriously, and people just simply don't trust it. And some of the things which have shocked me recently, when we talk about this morality that Israel seems to cling to, which shocks me, really does shock me. We have statements from a government minister the other day saying that we could happily justify killing 2 million Gazans, but the rest of the world wouldn't let us. When you hear that from a government minister, and on the same day or the next day you read that the Israeli government have basically stolen $26 million of tax receipts, which are supposed to be given over to the government in Gaza, and said, no, we're going to take this money and give it to the victims of October the 7th. These things are frankly disgusting. They're repugnant, and they don't really shine a very favorable spotlight on Israel. And Israel is now being shunned and boycotted, and the sanctions are just unprecedented around the world. Its economy is being beaten to pulp. That you wonder really, what is the long game here for Israel? What is really, how does Netanyahu get out of this? And and continues when the military is stretched to such extraordinary lengths. I'd really like to hear Richard's take on all this. Does he really believe that Israel has a high moral ground?
Well, I think let's finish on that then, because as Richard says, not all Israelis support Netanyahu, and once this war has finished, and hopefully will finish, then Netanyahu's got all sorts of questions. 30 seconds, Richard. What is the road to peace, and what's your take on what Martin said?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but let me just try and be as brief as possible. I think peace comes when both sides can reconcile the existence of the other. And as I said, for me, the key boundary is Palestinian acceptance that the Jews are an authentic part of this region, and that they deserve self-determination like all the other peoples, of course, including the Palestinians. And that mutual respect and reconciliation is the way forward. And you build that by a coalition of the willing, a coalition of the pragmatists. We've seen it when Israel has made peace with the Egyptians and the Jordanians, with the Abraham Accord. Prior to October, the big talk was about the Saudis. And so hopefully there is that alignment of the moderates to face against the extremists is the way forward.
Okay. We will continue this discussion. I thought it was a very productive discussion. There's lots to unpack. Richard Pater, Martin, and George, thank you both very much. I'll be back with you same time, same place tomorrow. Join us there.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live.